A black chef named Henry was unjustly fired for no reason by the new head chef from the restaurant where he had worked for years. 6 months later, Henry returns to the restaurant, and something incredible happens that leaves everybody speechless. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The black chef Henry Jackson, who was skilled and passionate, stood at the shiny stainless steel bar and chopped fresh herbs with his dark hands. Around Henry, the kitchen of El Gran Perry was busy, but he was in his element and focused on the job at hand. Making Henry's mouth water, the smell of sauces cooking and meats roasting filled the air. Having a deep sense of pleasure, he smiled to himself. He was meant to be here. Sophia, one of the young line cooks, yelled, "Chef Henry, the special tonight is incredible. You've outdone yourself again." Henry raised his head and looked up. The edges of his warm brown eyes wrinkled. "Thanks, Sophie, but remember that it's a team effort. We all make the magic happen." Henry's thoughts went to his biggest dream, which was to own his own restaurant. He imagined a cozy room full of happy guests, laughing as they ate food that came straight from his heart. The thought filled his heart with hope and resolution. Just then, the kitchen door opened, and Madame Beaumont, who was there before, poked her head in. When she saw Henry, her face lit up. She yelled, "There he is, the wizard of flavors himself. Henry, my dear, your lobster bisque was divine. I simply had to come back and tell you in person." Henry's face got warm when someone said nice things about him. His pride was strong as Madame Beaumont talked to him. "Thank you, Madame Beaumont. I'm so glad you enjoyed it." He loved cooking because it made people happy and could reach their hearts through their taste buds. Henry went back to work after she left, his mind full of new dish ideas. He carefully cut open a ripe tomato, feeling its weight in his hand. He told himself, "One day, serve dishes like this in my own place." The dream seemed so real and vivid that he could almost taste it. When Mr. Benjamin, the new head cook and part owner of El Gran Perry, walked into the kitchen, the mood changed dramatically. When he walked in, his shiny shoes hit the concrete floor, and his clean white chef's coat stood out against his cold personality. Henry stood tall. He was worried and excited at the same time, and his heart was beating fast. He made his specialty dish for the new boss in order to make a good first impression. "Mr. Benjamin," Henry said, putting out his hand. "I'm Henry Jackson. It's a pleasure to meet you." Henry was looked at by Mr. Benjamin. His eyes first went to Henry's dark skin, and then to the plate in front of him. He didn't pay attention to Henry's extended hand. "What's this?" Mr. Benjamin asked, his voice short and rude. Henry took a deep breath and tried to keep his smile on. "This is my signature dish, sir, a fusion of traditional French cuisine with Caribbean flavors. I thought you might like to try it." Mr. Benjamin's lip flickered a little. "I see. Well, Mr. Jackson, I'm not here to try experimental dishes. El Gran Perry is known for its classic French cuisine, and that's how it will stay." Henry felt like he had been hit in the gut by the words. He watched as Mr. Benjamin left the dish without even tasting it, and talked to the other cooking staff about his plans for the business. Henry stood there with his carefully made plate, getting cold. The joy he had felt moments before went away, and a sick feeling took its place in his stomach. He couldn't help but wonder if Mr. Benjamin's firing had something to do with more than the food. While the other chefs listened to Mr. Benjamin talk about history and quality, Henry quietly threw away the dish that he hadn't even started. He tried to pay attention to what Mr. Benjamin was saying, but the frosty look in the new chef's eyes kept coming back to him. Henry did not feel at home in the kitchen he had grown to love. For the first time since starting to work at El Gran Perry, there were changes in the kitchen of El Gran Perry in the days after Mr. Benjamin got there. Henry couldn't but notice that his plan was changing. At first, it was hard to tell. This time, instead of the busy dinner shifts he was used to, he had more lunch shifts. Henry overheard Mr. Benjamin talking to another cook one afternoon as he got ready for the lunch rush. "We need to stick to classic tastes," Mr. Benjamin said. "No more of this fusion nonsense." Henry's heart sank, but he kept working with his head down. He tried to give Mr. Benjamin ideas when they were planning the food, but he would cut him off or just ignore them. Some of the line cooks, Sarah, asked Henry, "Have you seen how Mr. Benjamin's been treating you lately?" as they cleaned up after their shift. Henry stopped for a moment as a lump formed in his throat. "I'm sure it's nothing," he said, with a fake smile. "He's just settling in, you know." Sarah made a face. "It doesn't seem right. You're one of our best chefs." "Thanks, Sarah," Henry replied, moved by her care. "But don't worry about me. I'm sure things will work out." More and more of Henry's co-workers told him they were worried as the weeks went by. Henry's plans were turned down by Mr. Benjamin, and he kept him away from the most important dishes. Henry tried to stay positive, even though he was feeling more and more uneasy. He put everything he had into his job and made each dish with love and care, even if it was just a lunch salad. "My work will speak for itself," Henry told himself every morning as he put on his apron. "I just need to keep doing my best." Henry couldn't help but feel hopeful as he watched Mr. Benjamin praise other cooks' food that wasn't nearly as creative as his own. He wondered how long he could keep her up. At L. Grand Prairie, dinner service was in full swing and very busy. There was a lot going on in the kitchen, and the chefs and line cooks were working together perfectly. Henry was at his station, carefully putting together his specialty dish, which is a modern take on coq au vin. Mr. Benjamin came up to him as he was putting the finishing touches on the plate. The head cook looked at Henry's work with narrowed eyes. The noise in the kitchen was drowned out by Mr. Benjamin's question, "What is this?" Henry stood tall, and you could hear his pride in his words. "It's my take on coq au vin. The customers love it." Mr. Benjamin's face turned red with disgust. "This is not coq au vin. This is an abomination." It got quiet in the kitchen. Henry and Mr. Benjamin were the only ones who were seen. "But, sir," Henry said, his voice steady even though his chest hurt, "I've been making this dish for years. It's one of our most popular." With a raised voice, Mr. Benjamin said, "I don't care how popular it is. This is not what we serve at Grand Prairie. This is a respectable French restaurant, not some trendy fusion cafe." Henry's face got hot as Mr. Benjamin kept yelling at him in front of the whole kitchen staff. He saw how his co-workers were looking down on Mr. Benjamin, and how shocked the younger employees were as he went on and on. Henry began to understand what the words meant. He saw that Mr. Benjamin's eyes never quite met his, and that his movements seemed over the top, almost like he was acting. He seemed to be putting on a show, but for whom? A sudden understanding hit Henry like a kick in the gut. It wasn't just about the food. All of Mr. Benjamin's actions, the way he constantly brushed off Henry's ideas and pushed him to the side, were signs of something deeper that Henry had hoped he wouldn't have to face in this kitchen he had come to call home. Mark felt a range of feelings as Mr. Benjamin stormed off, leaving him standing alone with his abomination of a dish. Though he was angry, hurt, and disappointed, a strong will started to burn inside him. He wouldn't let Mr. Benjamin's biases color who he was or what he cooked. Henry got home that night with slouched shoulders and stress-filled eyes. The soothing smell of Angela's homemade lasagna filled the air as he walked in the door. But his mood didn't improve, even though his favorite meal was on the way. Angela came out of the kitchen with a bright smile that faded when she saw how upset her husband looked. "Henry, what's wrong, honey?" Henry sat down in a chair at the table and ran his hand over his face. He said, "It's Mr. Benjamin," in a voice that was almost a whisper. "Things are getting worse at the restaurant." She sat next to him and took his hand. "Tell me everything," she asked. Henry, with a deep sigh, told what had happened that night, how Mr. Benjamin had been made fun of in public, how his co-workers were shocked, and how the stress in the kitchen was rising. His voice was shaking because he was angry and hurt. Henry finally told her, "I think it's because I'm black." He looked her in the eyes. "I'm the only black chef in that kitchen, and Mr. Benjamin, he treats me differently. It's like he's looking for reasons to push me out." Angela tightened her grip on his hand, and her eyes lit up with compassion and a fierce desire to protect him. She spoke in a soft voice, "Oh, Henry, I'm so sorry you're going through this. But you listen to me." Her voice got louder. "You are incredibly talented. Your food is amazing, and you have every right to be in that kitchen." Henry agreed, and the words his wife spoke gave him strength. "I know, but sometimes I wonder if it's worth the fight." "It is," Angela maintained. She cupped his face in her hands and looked straight into his eyes. "You've worked so hard to get where you are. Don't let Mr. Benjamin's bias take that away from you. You are strong, Henry Jackson. You're not just a great chef. You're a good man with a beautiful heart. That's worth more than any fancy title or restaurant." Henry's lips were pulled together in a small smile. He asked in a low voice, "What would I do without you?" Angela leaned in close and kissed him on the face. "You'll never have to find out. We're in this together, remember? Now, let's eat some lasagna and figure out how we're going to show Mr. Benjamin just how wrong he is." When they sat down to dinner, Henry felt more determined than ever. He knew he could handle any problems that came up at L.R. as long as Angela was with him. Herodotus. Being mean to Henry by Mr. Benjamin became more obvious as the days went by. There was a lot of stress in L.R. Perry got thicker, like a sauce that was cut down too much. It was sweet and unpleasant. The next morning, Henry got to work and saw that the other cooks were huddled around Mr. Benjamin, talking about what they were going to serve that week. As Henry walked up, the talk stopped all of a sudden. Before he turned back to the group, Mr. Benjamin looked at Henry with cold eyes. "As I was saying," Mr. Benjamin continued, ignoring Henry, "next week, we'll have a new tasting menu. I've already given you each a dish to serve." Henry swished his throat clean. "Excuse me, Mr. Benjamin, what would you like me to prepare?" Mr. Benjamin's lip flickered a little. "Oh, Henry, I didn't see you there. You can continue with your usual station. We won't be needing any of your creative input for this menu." The words hurt like salt in a wound. Henry looked around at his coworkers, hoping to see a friendly face or a sign of support. Instead, he saw blank stares and awkward moving. Over the course of the days, Henry felt more and more alone. It seemed like important talks about changing the menu or having VIPs over always happened when he wasn't there. His ideas were thrown out without being thought about, and his knowledge was not taken into account. What hurt even more was how far Henry was getting from the other chefs, who he used to think of as friends, but now barely saw him. When he went into the break room, people would stop talking. When he left, they would start talking again, but in a quieter voice. In the walk-in fridge one afternoon, Henry heard two of his coworkers talking quietly to each other. "I feel bad for Henry," someone said, "but what can we do? If we stick up for him, we might be next on Mr. Benjamin's chopping block." "I know," the other person said, with a heavy sigh. "It's not right, but I can't risk losing this job. I've got a family to support." Henry took a quiet step away. His heart was heavy. The fact that he was now the only one fighting made him feel like a lead belt. He knew why they were scared. When the night of the big show came around, the Perry was very excited. There were food reviewers, celebrities, and important business leaders in the restaurant, along with other important people from the city. Henry should have used the chance to show off his cooking skills, but Mr. Benjamin had other ideas. As the cooking staff got together for their pre-service meeting, Mr. Benjamin gave them their jobs. "Pierre, you'll be in charge of the appetizers. Sarah, you'll be in charge of the main courses. And Henry," Mr. Benjamin paused, his eyes gleaming with barely hidden disdain, You'll be in charge of the dishes and the prep work tonight." Marcus thought someone had hit him. Being in charge of the dishes on one of the most important nights of the year. When he tried to speak out against it, Mr. Benjamin had already moved on to talking about the special menu items for the evening, many of which Henry had helped come up with. Marcus sat down at the sink with a heavy heart. While he washed the pots and pans, he could hear the guests talking and the silverware clinking. The smell of his delicious foods filled the kitchen, a cruel reminder of what he was missing. Throughout the night, Henry saw Mr. Benjamin walk around the dining room and accept praise on dishes that Henry had thought of. The seared scallops with truffle foam? Oh, yes. A personal creation, Mr. Benjamin told a food writer, forgetting that Henry had actually come up with the dish in the first place. Even though everything was unfair, Henry kept working hard. He cleaned every pot and made sure that every veggie was cut up just right. He was determined to keep his pride and professionalism even in this lowly job. Henry got more and more angry as the night went on, but he also became more determined. He was in the background for now, but he knew what he was good for. He wouldn't let Mr. Benjamin's actions change how much he loved cooking or how much he wanted to open his own restaurant one day. With a sad heart, but a strong will, Henry got to the restaurant early the next day. He knew that Mr. Benjamin's unfair behavior could not go on any longer. Henry took a big breath and walked up to Mr. Benjamin. While the kitchen staff worked hard to get ready for the day, Henry asked, "Mr. Benjamin, may I have a word with you?" His voice was calm, even though he was feeling nervous. Mr. Benjamin turned around and raised an eyebrow in surprise. "What is it, Henry? We're quite busy, as you can see." Henry didn't give up. "I think it's important we discuss this now, sir." The kitchen became very quiet all of a sudden. The staff could feel the stress in the air. Henry and Mr. Benjamin were the only ones who were seen. He said, "Very well," but his tone was cut off. "Speak your mind." Henry took a deep breath in and out. "Mr. Benjamin, I've been noticing a pattern in how I'm being treated here. I believe I'm facing discrimination because of my race." Everyone in the kitchen let out a loud gasp. Mr. Benjamin's eyes got narrow, and his face turned red. "That's a very serious accusation, Henry. What makes you think that?" Henry spoke up, his voice getting louder. "You've been consistently undermining my work, sir. You've relegated me to less important tasks, ignored my input, and even taken credit for my dishes. I can't help but notice I'm the only black chef here, and the only one receiving this treatment." The people working in the kitchen looked at each other awkwardly. Some nodded in agreement, but others turned away, feeling bad that they hadn't spoken up sooner. The angry look on Mr. Benjamin's face changed shape. "How dare you say such things? Nothing I've done has changed the high standards of this business. Maybe you're not cut out for this kitchen if you can't handle the stress." Henry stood tall and didn't move when Mr. Benjamin got angry. "Sir, I can handle the stress. What I can't stand is being treated unfairly. You should treat me and give me the same chances as everyone else here, because I'm a good cook." There was a lot of stress in the kitchen, and everyone held their breath to see how the argument would go. As Mr. Benjamin glared at Henry, his face turned an even darker shade of red. The kitchen staff watched in shock and silence, and the air was thick with tension. "That's enough," Mr. Benjamin yelled, and the stainless steel surfaces echoed with his words. "I will not stand here and be accused of discrimination in my own kitchen." Henry stood his ground, and to Mr. Benjamin's eyes, he looked. "Sir, I'm simply asking for fair treatment." "Fair treatment?" It made Mr. Benjamin laugh. "I'm going to treat you right. You're fired. Get out of my kitchen right away and pack your things." The kitchen shook with a collective gasp. Henry was so shocked by being fired that he couldn't say a word for a moment. He felt like he had been punched in the gut. "You can't do that," one of the Sue's cooks whispered, but Mr. Benjamin given him a sharp look to shut up. Henry took a deep breath and tried to hold back the tears that were coming. When he looked around at his coworkers, Some tried to avoid his eyes, while others looked at him with pity. Henry said, "Very well," but his voice was barely above a whisper. With all the grace he could muster, he slowly took off his apron and set it on the counter. It took him a moment to walk to his locker and get his things. As Henry gathered his things, the kitchen was strangely quiet. He could feel the weight of everyone's stares on his back. As he was getting ready to leave, he saw the dish he had been working on earlier, a sign of how passionate and skilled he was, no left behind. Henry left the kitchen after taking one last look at the place that had been his second home for years. He heard a loud thud as the heavy door swung shut behind him. As soon as Henry stepped outside into the cool morning air, what had just happened became more real to him. It was the end of his time at L.R. Perry. The job he had worked so hard for was gone in an instant. As he walked to his car, his head was full of ideas. How would he take care of Angela and their kids? What is he going to say? After this, where would he go? Henry stood in front of yet another restaurant. He sagged in defeat, and the "no hiring" sign in the window made fun of him. It was a sharp reminder of all the times he had been turned down for jobs in the past few weeks. He let out a heavy sigh and held his chef's resume tightly in his hand. He whispered to himself, "This can't be happening." But his voice was hard to make out over the noise of the busy city street. Henry was worried as he walked home. There were a lot of bills to pay, and Angela had been so helpful. But he could tell she was worried because of it. He had to get a job quickly. Henry looked at a small diner on the corner of their street. First thing in the morning, he felt like the old "Help Wanted" sign in the window was calling to him. With a sad heart, he opened the door by pushing it open. Betty, the owner of the diner, told him, "You're overqualified," after taking a quick look at his resume. "But if you want the job, it's yours." Henry put down his pride and gave a nod. "That's fine with me, thanks." For the next week, Henry had to flip burgers and make easy sandwiches. He was determined to do the job, even though it was very different from the gourmet meals he used to make. He slid a plate of eggs and bacon across the bar and said, "Order up." Joe was the customer, and he took a bite and smiled. "Best eggs I've had here in years," Joe told Henry with a smile. Henry felt a pang in his heart, even though he was flattered. He missed the imagination and challenge of fine dining. He was determined to keep his cooking skills sharp, so he would write down food ideas in a small notebook during his breaks. Betty saw Henry playing around with the diner's few items. One quiet afternoon, making a new sauce for the meatloaf special. She opened her eyes wide and said, "That smells amazing." Henry gave a shy smile, just trying something new. He felt a familiar spark of fire ignite inside him as he stirred the sauce. His love for cooking was still strong, even though he worked in a small diner. But he was set on getting back to the world of fine food, no matter how long it took. Henry was thinking about his next shift as he wiped down the bar at the diner. When the doorbell rang, he looked up and saw a woman in her mid-40s walk in. She looked around the room with her eyes. "Can I help you?" Henry asked in a nice way. The woman got very happy. "Are you Henry Jackson?" Henry nodded in surprise. "Yes, that's me." She put out her hand and said, "My name is Sarah, and I work at the Oakwood Community Center. I've heard wonderful things about your cooking." Henry shook her hand. He looked at her with eyes that were both interested and wary. "Thanks. What can I do for you?" Sarah gave a warm smile. "A charity cook-off is being planned for next month to raise money for our after-school programs. We'd love for you to take part." When Henry heard about the cook-off, his heart skipped a beat, but worry quickly set in. "I appreciate the offer, but I'm not sure I'm the right person for this nonsense," Sarah urged. "People know about your good name. Having you there would really make people pay attention to our cause." Henry paused. A lot of different emotions at the same time. "Can I think about it?" Sarah told him, "Of course," and gave him a flyer. "Please. It would be an honor to have you." Henry looked at the flyer while sitting at the kitchen table that night. Angela saw that he was distracted and sat down next to him. Her question was soft. "What's on your mind, honey?" Henry let out a sigh and talked about the offer. "I'm not sure if I should do it. What if I'm no longer good enough?" Angela took his hand, and her eyes were full of love and hope. "Henry, your skills haven't gone away just because you work at a diner. This could be a great chance." "But what if?" Angela stepped in. "You're an amazing chef. And this is your chance to remind everyone, including yourself, of that fact." Henry's lips were pulling together in a small smile. "You really think I should do it?" "Absolutely," Angela said. "And I'll be there cheering you on every step." After work, Henry's friend and former co-worker Tom came by for lunch. The next day, Tom's eyes lit up when Henry talked about the cook-off. "Man, you've got to do it," Tom screamed. "Show everyone what they're missing out on." Henry could feel a familiar thrill growing up in his chest. It was becoming more and more appealing to him. To make something truly unique and share his interest with others. "You know what?" With a new sense of purpose in his voice, Henry spoke. "I think I will." Henry was in his small kitchen at home, which was full of different foods. There were a lot of spices, fresh vegetables, and different cooking tools on the counters. Taking a big breath, he inhaled the smells that had always made him feel better. When Henry started to chop veggies, he felt excited in a way that he hadn't felt in months. It was like music to his ears when the knife hit the cutting board in a steady beat. He started to softly hum, and a smile started to form on the edges of his mouth. Henry thought about the food his grandma used to make. He remembered how her gumbo tasted thick and rich, and how she had taught him her secret recipes with love. He was moved to make a dish that paid homage to his heritage, while also having a modern twist. Henry played around with different flavor mixtures for hours on end. As he tasted, changed, and improved his creation. The kitchen filled with tantalizing smells that made Angela peek in. "This place smells great," she said, her eyes sparkling with happiness at seeing her husband so involved in his hobby again. Henry smiled and looked up. "I believe I have something unique here. Anne, would you like to try it?" As Angela took a bite, her eyes got bigger. She let out a deep, "Oh, Henry, this is incredible." Henry felt warm inside in a way he hadn't felt in a long time. He knew he had missed this feeling a lot, the joy of making something truly delicious and sharing his art with others. Henry kept working on and improving his dish over the next few days. When he woke up early, he would write down thoughts that gave him ideas. While he worked at the diner, he would write down ideas on napkins. Because he was excited to try out new taste combinations. When he got home, every day that went by, Henry felt his confidence building. Following his firing from LR Epicurean, he had been filled with question. But that doubt started to fade. What it left behind was a new sense of mission. Being in his kitchen, finishing off his dish, Henry understood something very important. Cooking wasn't just his job. It was a part of who he was. This love would always be there for him, really to be renewed, no matter where life took him. The charity cook-off day had finally come. Henry was excited and nervous when he woke up early. His heart was racing. He carefully packed his tools and fixings, and checked everything twice before leaving. Henry was amazed by how full of life the community center was when he walked in. I could hear pans sizzling, knives cutting, and excited talk all around the room. People from all walks of life were setting up their stations, trying to show the judges and the crowd what they could do. Henry took a deep breath and set up his own station. He carefully put his items in order, and his hands moved with the practiced accuracy of a chef who has done this many times before. He felt calm as he worked. He was meant to be here. Before the race started, Henry got lost in the rhythm of cooking. He moved with ease and confidence, and every dish he made showed how creative he was. People were drawn to his station by the smells that came from it. and they watched in awe as he successfully mixed flavors in ways they didn't expect. As the judges went around, Henry was proud to show off his food. He talked about how each dish came about by telling stories about his grandmother's food and his own journey as a chef. The judges paid close attention and their eyes got bigger as they tasted his food. One judge couldn't hold back her excitement and shouted, "This is amazing. The flavors are so strong, but still just right. It tastes different from anything I've ever had." More people gathered around Henry's spot as word spread about how great his food was. As people waited impatiently for samples, they talked happily about the talented chef they had just found. As Henry looked out at the sea of happy faces, he felt a warmth spread through his chest. He felt truly seen and praised for his skills for the first time in months. Since he lost his job at LR Epicurean, he had been in a lot of pain and doubt. But those feelings started to go away, and he felt a new sense of purpose and hope. Henry was surrounded by friends and people who wanted to wish him well. As the event came to a close, the people around him praised his creativity, asked for recipes, and asked where they could find more of his food. Henry was stunned by the warm welcome, which made him feel thankful and happy. As the crowd thinned out, Henry saw a well-dressed woman walking toward his stop. Her sharp eyes looked over the dishes that were still there, and she smiled. Henry knew right away that it was Evelyn Wright, a well-known and famous food critic in the city. "Mr. Jackson," Evelyn said, putting out her hand. "I must say, your dish is absolutely extraordinary." He felt his heart beat faster as he shook her hand. "Thank you, Wright. It makes me happy that you liked them." Evelyn's eyes were bright with excitement. "Enjoyed is not enough of a word. Mr. Jackson, your flavors tell a story of love, family, and strength." Henry could feel a lump in his throat. He didn't think that someone would understand his work so well. "I've heard about your recent problems," Evelyn said, lowering her voice. "It's a shame when talent like yours is stifled by prejudice and narrow-mindedness." Henry couldn't say anything, so he just nodded. He was still hurt by the thought of being fired from LR Epicurean. "But today," Evelyn said, her tone getting happier, "I saw a chef who won't let setbacks define her. Mr. Jackson, your imagination and skill deserve a chance to shine." She stopped and looked at Henry's face. "Have you ever considered opening your own restaurant?" Henry's eyes got bigger. "It's been a dream of mine for years, but..." Evelyn gently cut her off. "I believe in your talent, Mr. Jackson, and I'd like to help make that dream a reality." Henry thought that the ground beneath him had moved. "You want to help me open a restaurant?" Evelyn smiled bigger and nodded. "I know people in the business, and I'm always looking for new talent to back up. People should be able to share your food in tales." Henry's eyes filled with tears as Evelyn's offer hit him hard. There was more to this than just a chance at a new job. It was a chance to show what he could do and share his interest in his own way. "Miss Wright, you don't know what to say," Henry stuttered, because he was so upset. Evelyn put her hand on his arm to make him feel better. "Yes, Mr. Jackson, let's work together to make something lovely." Henry's hands were shaking as he opened his flat door. He kept going over every word of his talk with Evelyn Wright in his head. Angela looked up from her book as her husband walked in. Her eyes got really big when she saw his red face. She put down her book and asked, "Henry, what happened?" Henry tried to calm down by taking a deep breath. "Angela, you're not going to believe it. She went to the cook-off with Evelyn Wright." Angela raised an eyebrow. "The critic of food? What did she say?" "She wants to help me open my own restaurant," Henry whispered. Angela's mouth dropped open. The room was quiet for a moment. She then got up from her seat and threw her arms around Henry, her face filled with happiness. "Oh, Henry, that's amazing," she yelled, but his chest squished her words. Henry felt the weight of the past few months start to lift as they hugged. He took a step back and looked Angela in the eyes. "It's everything we've dreamed of, but it's also terrifying. What if I'm not ready?" She held his face in her hands and looked at him with eyes full of love and purpose. "Henry Jackson, you were born ready. This is your moment." Henry and Angela planned everything they could think of over the next few days. At their small kitchen table, they sat with notebooks full of ideas, sketches of possible restaurant plans, and lists of things that could be on the menu. Putting her pen to her chin one night, Angela asked, "What about roots and wings? It represents your connection to your heritage and your ability to soar to new heights." Henry's face lit up. "That's perfect, Angela. It's exactly what I want the restaurant to be about." Henry felt like he had a new purpose. As they worked, the pain of being fired from Perry started to go away, and he became excited about the future. He felt like he could do anything with Angela and Evelyn's help. One night, as they were getting ready for bed, Henry said in a soft voice, "I never thought I'd say this, but I'm almost thankful for what happened with Mr. Benjamin. If I hadn't been fired, I might never have had this chance." Angela smiled and put her hand on his. "You've always had the talent, Henry. Now, the world is finally going to see it." Henry had never even dreamed of the opportunities that Evelyn Wright's fame in the food world gave him. As planned, she set up a meeting with possible investors at a sleek office in downtown. Henry found himself in front of a group of well-dressed business people, holding his portfolio in his hands. In a confident and warm voice, Evelyn said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce you to Henry Jackson. He is a chef with amazing talent and vision." Henry took a big breath and spoke. With each word, his voice got stronger. He talked about his life, how much he loved cooking, and his dream of opening a restaurant that would honor his roots, while also trying new things in the kitchen. Henry could see the client's eyes getting more interested as he talked. A woman with gray hair and kind eyes leaned forward. "Mr. Jackson, your passion is evident. Tell us more about your concept." Henry's face lit up as he talked about what he wanted roots and wings to be. His eyes were shining with excitement as he said, "It's a mix of traditional soul food and modern techniques. I want to create dishes that remind people of home while surprising them with new flavors." The investors gave Henry a thumbs up, and by the end of the meeting, they had agreed to give him the money he needed. It was time to leave the office, and Evelyn gave Henry a shoulder squeeze. "You did it, Henry. Your dream is becoming a reality." Henry worked hard on making plans over the next few weeks. He played around with recipes and wrote down ideas for hours in his small kitchen at home. Angela would often find him there late at night, surrounded by pots and pans and with a very focused look on his face. "Try this," he told her one night, as he gave her a taste of a rich, fragrant stew. "It's my grandmother's recipe, but I've added a twist." Angela looked at it with wide eyes as she tasted it. "Henry, this is amazing." Henry smiled, and his chest swelled with joy. He was sure he was going in the right direction. Every dish he made told a story about him and mixed his past and his dreams for the future. As Henry thought about how to make roots and wings come together, he felt very thankful. He thought about all the people who had helped him, like Angela, Evelyn, and the investors who had faith in him. Being sure of his skills gave him the courage to spread his wings and fly. At the same time that Henry was making plans for roots and wings, word of his return spread through the city's restaurant scene. The news spread quickly and was heard by his old coworkers and customers at Lipari. A lot of people were shocked and happy to hear that Henry was going back to working in restaurants. Henry was looking at possible places for his new restaurant. One sunny afternoon, when his phone rang with a text message. It came from Sophie, a sous cook he had worked with a lot at Lipari. "Henry, I just heard about your new restaurant. I'm so happy for you. You deserve this chance to shine." Henry got a warm feeling in his chest as he read the message. He had forgotten how much he missed working with his old kitchen team's friendship. As the day went on, more texts came in from Henry's old coworkers, including line cooks, servers, and even the pastry chef, who had always admired his creativity. That same week, Henry ran into Mr. and Mrs. Goldstein while store shopping for ingredients to try out new recipes. They were regulars at Lipari and had always said nice things about Henry's cooking. "Henry, my dear boy," Mrs. Goldstein yelled, her eyes shining with happiness. "We've missed your wonderful dishes. Is it true you're opening your own place?" Henry agreed, and a shy smile spread across his face. "Yes, ma'am. It's called Roots and Wings. I'm hoping to open in a few months." The boss gave him a pat on the back. "We'll be first in line, son. Your food always had heart. It'll be good to taste it again." Henry thought about what the Goldsteins said for a long time after they left. Their excitement and the support from his old coworkers gave him a new drive to do things. Even though he had been through a lot, he understood that his cooking had changed people's lives for the better. Henry was still working on his plans for the restaurant when he got an email from Jean-Luc, the head chef at Lipari. Jean-Luc offered to help Henry put together a wine list for Roots and Wings that would go well with his one-of-a-kind meal. When work on Roots and Wings started, Henry was in the middle of a lot of things going on. There were new choices to make and problems to solve every day. But for Henry, each problem was just another chance to give his all to his dream. Henry was on site from the crack of dawn until well after sunset, managing the whole process of building the restaurant. He worked closely with the architects and designers to make sure the area matched the creative and warm food he served. "I want the dining room to feel like home and like an adventure," Henry told the interior designer, his eyes shining with joy. "Can we mix warm wood tones with pops of bright color?" The designer nodded and scribbled quickly as Henry explained what he had in mind. They made the room feel warm and welcoming by choosing rich mahogany tables and bright artwork with African themes for the walls. Henry was even more involved in the kitchen. He carefully chose every piece of equipment, from the high-tech ovens to the chef's knives that were made by hand. He had very high standards for every tool. "This isn't just about cooking," Henry told Angela one night, as they looked over the plans for the kitchen. "It's about creating an experience. Every dish that leaves this kitchen will carry a piece of my story." But he had to deal with some problems to make his idea come true. The opening date might have to be pushed back because of delays in construction, and they started to run out of money because of unexpected costs. Henry stayed up late a lot of the time to look at numbers and make hard choices. Henry felt the weight of his dream pressing down on him as he dealt with the shipment of broken kitchen tiles on a very stressed day. He began to have doubts, suggesting that he may have taken on too much. At that very moment, his phone rang with a message from Evelyn Wright, the food reviewer who had always believed in him. "How's it going, chef? Can't wait to see what you're cooking up." Just those few words of support were enough to get Henry back on track. He stood up straight and got back to work, taking on each task with new energy. As the weeks went by, Henry's hard work started to pay off. The restaurant slowly took shape, going from being a construction site to a warm, welcoming place that perfectly reflected Henry's vision for the food. As the day Roots and Wings opened got closer, there was a lot of excitement in the city's food scene. People were excited about Henry's new business because they knew it would bring new tastes and experiences to the table. On the other side of town, Grand Prairie was getting a different kind of attention. The restaurant that used to be very busy was now very quiet most nights. As he looked out at the half-empty dining room, Mr. Benjamin paced the kitchen, his face red with worry. He asked the sous chef, "Where are all our regulars?" And the chef could only shrug back. There was a clear hole in the menu where Henry's creative dishes should have been. Customers who used to love the unique mix of tastes now complain about the bland, uninspired food. Mr. Benjamin's insistence on sticking to old recipes didn't appeal to their growing number of different kinds of customers. But it wasn't just the food that made people leave. Because Henry left, the diner had a very different vibe than before. The kitchen had gone from being a warm and friendly place to one that was tense and depressing. People on staff didn't speak up or offer new ideas, because they were afraid of getting in trouble with Mr. Benjamin. This bad energy made its way into the dining room, where people could feel the tension. The attentive service that used to be great became sloppy, and the whole eating experience got worse. The money problems got worse over the next few weeks. There was no way to avoid El Grand Perry. As Mr. Benjamin understood how bad things were, he found himself staring at spreadsheets full of red numbers. His hands were shaking. "We can't keep going like this," he told himself, finally realizing how bad what he had done was. Longtime customers who had been going to the restaurant for years started to look for new places to eat. Food critics used to write glowing reviews of El Gran Perry, but now they wrote harsh reviews that hurt the restaurant's name even more. Because he was proud, Mr. Benjamin couldn't see what was really causing the downturn. He said that the restaurant was having trouble because of the economy, changing food trends, and even his staff. But somewhere inside him, a voice kept reminding him of the skilled chef he had pushed away. The night of the big opening was here, and Roots and Wings was very busy. As people poured into the restaurant, the warm, friendly environment made them feel welcome. Henry stood in the kitchen, excited and happy. His heart was racing. As soon as the first items came out of the kitchen, there were cheers in the dining room. Every customer was blown away by Henry's unique mix of traditional flavors and current cooking methods. The whole neighborhood came out to support him, and the diner was full to the brim. Angela walked around the tables, chatting with guests and enjoying the success of her husband. She was beaming with happiness. Henry looked at her through the kitchen window. She smiled and gave him a thumbs up. Henry worked in the kitchen with more energy than ever before, and you could taste his love in every dish he made. His team moved smoothly around him because they were amazed by how he led and how creative he was. The mood was electric, with lots of laughter and friendship. It was very different from El Gran Perry, where things were serious. As the night went on, food reviewers and famous people from the area started to show up because of all the excitement about the new restaurant. As they ate Henry's specialty dishes, their eyes got bigger with each bite. A lot of people were talking about the creative food and Henry's moving story. On the other side of town, Mr. Benjamin was looking through social media by himself in his office at L.R. Perry. He felt bad as he read post after post praising Roots and Wings and its great cook. Photos of happy customers and delicious food filled his feed. It hit Mr. Benjamin like a punch when he realized what he had lost. He thought about the full tables, few bookings, and rising costs in his own restaurant. It was becoming painfully clear what would happen because of what he did. Henry got up from the kitchen at Roots and Wings to speak to the crowd. When he spoke, the room went silent because his speech was so full of emotion. He said, with sparkling eyes, "Thank you all for being here tonight. This restaurant is a dream come true, and it wouldn't be possible without your support." Roots and Wings kept growing as the weeks turned into months. A lot of food fans came from all over the city and beyond to eat at the restaurant. People kept coming back for more of Henry's creative meals and friendly service. At the same time, L.R. Perry across town was a shell of what it used to be. When Mr. Benjamin got to work every day, he saw empty tables and a staff that wasn't even close to full. When he made his bad choices, the kitchen, which used to be very busy, became very quiet. One night, Mr. Benjamin was sitting alone in his office, going over his bank records and bills. That's when the truth of his situation hit him hard. He broke down in tears when he realized he was about to lose everything. Because of his pride and bias, he lost his best cook and the whole business. At the very moment when hopelessness was about to take over, there was a knock on the door. Henry was standing in the hallway when Mr. Benjamin quickly wiped his eyes and looked up. The look on Mr. Benjamin's face showed shock and shame. A whispered question, "Henry, what are you doing here?" Henry walked into the office with a look that was both determined and caring. "Mr. Benjamin, I've heard that the restaurant is having trouble. To have an idea for you." Mr. Benjamin raised an eyelid in surprise and interest. Even after everything that had happened, and all the pain he had caused, Henry was still here to offer help. Henry took a deep breath and kept going. "I know we've had our differences, but I believe in second chances. I'm offering to buy El Gran Perry and incorporate it into Roots and Wings. You would stay on as a consultant, sharing your expertise and helping to blend the best of both establishments." As Henry surprised everyone by being so kind and generous, Mr. Benjamin sat there in stunned silence. He never thought he'd get an offer like that, especially from the person he had hurt so badly. Henry caught Mr. Benjamin's attention, and he stared at him with wide eyes. The man he had fired and abused was now standing in front of him, offering him a way out. It was almost too much to handle. He stuttered, "I don't understand," and his voice was full of feeling. "After everything I did to you, why would you want to help me?" Henry gave a soft smile, and his eyes were filled with kindness. He walked up to Mr. Benjamin's desk and said, "Because staying angry hurts us both. I've learned that forgiveness can be a powerful thing." He was calm and sure of himself. El Gran Perry has a rich history and so much potential. It would be a shame to see it close its doors forever. I believe that together we can breathe new life into it. Someone named Mr. Benjamin let out a heavy sigh as his shoulders slumped. "But how? The restaurant is failing. It's beyond saving." Henry shook his head, and this time his voice was firm. "No restaurant is beyond saving if you have the right people and the right vision. I see an opportunity here to blend the classic techniques that made El Gran Perry famous with the innovative approach we've developed at Roots and Wings." He stopped, letting his words sink in. "I'm offering to buy out your share of the restaurant, Mr. Benjamin. But I want you to stay on as a consultant. Your experience and knowledge are invaluable." He looked at the offer with wide eyes. He didn't deserve it, but it was more than he could have ever hoped for. He had a lump in his throat as he tried to find the right words to say. "Henry, too don't know what to say," he finally said, making sure his voice was barely above a whisper. "Your offer is incredibly generous, especially considering our history." Henry gave a nod, knowing how important the moment was. "I know it's a lot to take in. Take some time to think about it, but know that this offer comes from a place of respect for what L.R. Perry once was, and what it could be again." He looked down at his hands and then back up at Henry. At that moment, he saw not only a skilled chef, but also a man with great spirit and grace. After feeling humbled and thankful, Mr. Benjamin made his choice. He said, "I accept your offer, Henry," and his voice was full of relief and thanks. "Thank you for giving me and El Gran Perry a second chance." Henry and Mr. Benjamin were in the kitchen of El Gran Perry after the sale was done. It was quiet in the room that used to be packed with people, which was a sharp reminder of how bad the restaurant had become. Henry took a big breath and looked around at the familiar places. "Mr. Henry began, Mr. Benjamin," his voice steady and cool. "I have an idea for you." Mr. Benjamin looked up, his eyes having a mix of interest and fear. "Yes?" Henry gave a small smile. That made Mr. Benjamin's eyes widen in surprise. "I'd like to offer you the job of head chef here at L.R. Perry." "Head chef, but I thought..." Henry politely cut him off by raising his hand. "The past is over. Now, what counts is how this restaurant will do in the future. Your knowledge and experience are very useful, and I think you can be very important in bringing it back to life." He paused, and his face turned serious. "But let me make this clear. The way this restaurant is run will change from now on. Our main goals will be to include everyone, treat everyone with care, and make the workplace healthy for everyone." Mr. Benjamin slowly nodded as he thought about what Henry said. "That means there's no room for the prejudices and biases that used to be here, Henry said. "Everyone on our team, no matter where they come from, will be valued and given the same chances to shine. Are you sure you can do that?" For a moment, Mr. Benjamin was quiet and looked at the shiny countertops. He saw tears in his eyes when he looked up. "If you'll give me a chance, Henry, I promise to do everything I can to make things right." Henry put out his hand. "All right, Chef Benjamin. Welcome aboard. Let's work together to make something great." As the days went by, Mr. Benjamin was still getting used to his new job at L.R. Perry. Having to work for Henry, someone he had hurt so badly in the past, made him feel ashamed and uneasy. Every time Henry told him what to do or offered changes to the menu, he couldn't help but feel angry. In the middle of a busy night in the kitchen, Mr. Benjamin watched Henry easily lead his staff. His calm demeanor and positive words brought out the best in everyone. It was very different from the strict and authoritarian way he usually led. "I asked Chef Benjamin, could you help Sandra with the sauce for table 6? She's having a little trouble with it." Mr. Benjamin thought about it for a moment, then nodded and walked over to Sandra's station. He shocked himself by enjoying the interaction as he walked her through the steps. The young chef's eyes lit up with understanding, and her smile showed how thankful she was. Sandra said with thanks, "Thank you, Chef. Thanks a lot for your help." Mr. Benjamin felt warm in the chest, which was different from how he felt in the kitchen a long time ago. Henry gave him a polite nod as he looked over at her. Mr. Benjamin started to notice changes in himself as the weeks went by. He was looking forward to going to work and couldn't wait to work with the broad group of people Henry had put together. A far cry from the tense environment he used to create. The kitchen was now full of laughter. Henry turned to Mr. Benjamin one day as they were making plans for an upcoming event's food. "What do you think about adding some fusion dishes? I thought we might be able to combine traditional French methods with tastes from other foods." When this thought first came up, Mr. Benjamin would have laughed it off, but now, he found himself interested. He was shocked when he said, "That sounds interesting. Can we start with a different take on coq au vin by adding some Asian spices?" When Henry smiled at him, Mr. Benjamin felt proud in a way that he hadn't felt in years. Suddenly, he understood that Henry was helping him recover his love for cooking and learn to value different points of view. As they worked on the new menu together, Mr. Benjamin got really into the restaurant's new way of doing things. He started to see the value in having different kinds of people working together and helping young people grow. Henry and Mr. Benjamin worked together for months to give L.R. Perry a new lease on life. It took a while, but their shared hard work started to pay off. One sunny afternoon, they sat at a corner table that was full of papers and rough menus. He looked up from his notes with a smile on his face. "How about adding a section for seasonal deals?" he suggested. "It could keep things fresh and show off local ingredients." Mr. Benjamin smiled and nodded, rubbing his chin. "That's a great thought. Every month, we could switch up the meals so that our regulars always have something new to look forward to." Henry noted that Mr. Benjamin's mood had changed as they talked about the changes to the menu. The older chef's face had relaxed, and his voice had become more excited. It was very different from the tough man he used to be. The staff also began to notice the difference. The kitchen, which used to be a scary and tense place, was now full of good vibes. Chefs from different backgrounds brought their own ideas to the table, which made L.R. Perry stand out from other places in the city through its mix of flavors. One night, as the dinner service was ending, Henry called a meeting of the staff. He spoke with a friendly tone and said, "I want to thank all of you for your hard work. Thanks to your hard work and creativity, we've come a long way." Mr. Benjamin took a step forward and sucked his thumb. He said, "I'd like to say something too," but his voice was uncertain, which wasn't like him at all. "I know I wasn't always easy to work with, but Henry's guidance and your understanding have helped me learn a great deal. Thank you for giving me a second chance." After a moment of silence, the room burst in cheers. Henry saw Mr. Benjamin's face turn red and his lips twitch in a small smile. People who were interested in the changes at L.R. Perry started to come back as word got out. The restaurant had a warm, friendly feel to it, and the menu surprised and thrilled them. The restaurant became better known for more than just its food. It was also known for being open to everyone and trying new things when it came to fine eating. People who worked at L. Grand Perry started to notice small changes in Mr. Benjamin's behavior over the course of a few weeks. The head cook, who used to be strict and hard to get along with, started to soften a bit. His harsh orders turned into gentle direction over time, and his critical looks turned into positive nods. During a very busy lunch service one day, Shah, a young sous chef, dropped a tray of appetizers by chance. She stood still, expecting Mr. Benjamin to give her his usual hard lecture. He instead walked up to her quietly and said, "It's okay, Aisha. Things like this do happen. Let's get rid of this and start over." Everyone in the kitchen was shocked by Mr. Benjamin's sudden kindness. As Aisha and Mr. Benjamin worked together to clean up the mess, tears of thanks filled her eyes. The staff started to feel more comfortable around Mr. Benjamin as his change went on. As they became more sure that their thoughts would be heard and not thrown out, they started to share them more freely. Henry and Mr. Benjamin were in the kitchen of L. Grand Perry after the sale was done. The empty room, which was once full, showed how much the restaurant had dropped. Henry took a big breath and looked around at the familiar places. Mr. Henry began, "Benjamin," his voice steady and calm, "I have an idea for you." The look in Mr. Benjamin's eyes showed both interest and a little fear. "Yes?" Henry gave a small smile. "May I offer you the job of head chef here at L. Grand Perry?" It shocked Mr. Benjamin, and his eyes got really big. "Head chef? But I thought, after everything..." Henry politely cut him off by raising his hand. "The past is over. Now, what counts is how this restaurant will do in the future. Your knowledge and experience are very useful, and I think you can be very important in bringing it back to life." He paused, and his face turned serious. "But I want to make one thing clear. From now on, this restaurant will be run differently. Our main goals will be to include everyone, treat everyone with care, and make the workplace healthy for everyone." Mr. Benjamin slowly nodded as he thought about what Henry said. "Really? That means there's no room for the bias or prejudice that used to be here." Henry went on, "Everyone on our team, no matter where they come from, will be valued and given the same chances to shine. Are you sure you can do that?" For a moment, Mr. Benjamin was quiet and looked at the shiny countertops. He saw tears in his eyes when he looked up. "Henry, I don't deserve this kindness. Could you please give me a chance? I promise to do everything I can to make things right." Henry put out his hand. "All right, Chef Benjamin. Welcome aboard. Let's work together to make something great." The days went by, and Mr. Benjamin was still getting used to his new job at L. Grand Perry. Having to work for Henry, someone he had hurt so badly in the past, made him feel ashamed and uneasy. Every time Henry told him what to do or offered changes to the menu, he couldn't help but feel angry. In the middle of a busy night in the kitchen, Mr. Benjamin watched Henry easily lead his staff. His calm demeanor and positive words brought out the best in everyone. It was very different from the strict and authoritarian way he usually led. I asked Chef Benjamin, "Could you help Sandra with the sauce for table 6? She's having a little trouble with it." Mr. Benjamin thought about it for a moment, then nodded and walked over to Sandra's station. He shocked himself by enjoying the interaction as he walked her through the steps. The young chef's eyes lit up with understanding, and her smile showed how thankful she was. Sandra said with thanks, "Thank you, chef. Thanks a lot for your help." Mr. Benjamin felt warm in the chest, which was different from how he felt in the kitchen a long time ago. Henry gave him a polite nod as he looked over at her. Mr. Benjamin started to notice changes in himself as the weeks went by. He was looking forward to going to work and couldn't wait to work with the broad group of people Henry had put together. A far cry from the tense environment he used to create. The kitchen was now full of laughter and friendship. Henry turned to Mr. Benjamin one day as they were making plans for an upcoming event's food. "What do you think about adding some fusion dishes? I thought we might be able to combine traditional French methods with tastes from other foods." When this thought first came up, Mr. Benjamin would have laughed it off, but now he found himself interested. He was shocked when he said, "That sounds interesting. How about a different take on coq au vin, with some Asian spices to start?" When Henry smiled at him, Mr. Benjamin felt proud in a way that he hadn't felt in years. Suddenly, he understood that Henry was helping him recover his love for cooking and learn to value different points of view. As they worked on the new menu together, Mr. Benjamin got really into the restaurant's new way of doing things. He started to see the value in having different kinds of people working together and helping young people grow. Henry and Mr. Benjamin worked together for months to give El Grand Prairie a new lease on life. It took a while, but their shared hard work started to pay off. One sunny afternoon, they sat at a corner table that was full of papers and rough menus. He looked up from his notes with a smile on his face. "How about adding a section for seasonal deals? It could keep things fresh and show off local foods." Mr. Benjamin smiled and nodded, rubbing his chin. "That's a great thought. Every month, we could switch up the meals so that our regulars always have something new to look forward to." Henry noted that Mr. Benjamin's mood had changed as they talked about the changes to the menu. The older chef's face had relaxed, and his voice had become more excited. It was very different from the tough man he used to be. The staff also began to notice the difference. The kitchen, which used to be a scary and tense place, was now full of good vibes. The chefs at El Grand Prairie came from different backgrounds and brought their own ideas to the table. They mixed tastes in a way that made the restaurant stand out from others in the city. One night, as the dinner service was ending, Henry called a meeting of the staff. He spoke with a friendly tone and said, "I want to thank all of you for your hard work. Thanks to your hard work and creativity, we've come a long way." Mr. Benjamin took a step forward and sucked his thumb. He said, "I'd like to say something too," but his voice was uncertain, which wasn't like him at all. "I know I wasn't always easy to work with, but Henry's guidance and your understanding have helped me learn a great deal. Thank you for giving me a second chance." After a moment of silence, the room burst in cheers. Henry saw Mr. Benjamin's face turn red and his lips twitch in a small smile. As word got out about the changes at El Grand Prairie, people who were interested started coming back. The restaurant had a warm, friendly feel to it, and the menu surprised and thrilled them. The restaurant became better known for more than just its food. It was also known for being open to everyone and trying new things when it came to fine eating. People who worked at El Grand Prairie started to notice small changes in Mr. Benjamin's behavior over the course of a few weeks. The head cook, who used to be strict and hard to get along with, started to soften a bit. His harsh orders turned into gentle direction over time, and his critical looks turned into positive nods. During a very busy lunch service one day, Shah, a young sous chef, dropped a tray of appetizers by chance. She stood still, expecting Mr. Benjamin to give her his usual hard lecture. He instead walked up to her quietly and said, "It's okay, Aisha. Things like this do happen. Let's get rid of this and start over." Everyone in the kitchen was shocked by Mr. Benjamin's sudden kindness. As Aisha and Mr. Benjamin worked together to clean up the mess, tears of thanks filled her eyes. The staff started to feel more comfortable around Mr. Benjamin as his change went on. As they became more sure that their thoughts would be heard and not thrown out, they started to share them more freely. The mood in the kitchen changed from stressed and competitive to friendly and helpful. At a staff meeting, Mr. Benjamin surprised everyone by asking for feedback on how he runs the business. "I understand that I haven't always been the best to work with," he said, feeling bad about it. "But I'm determined to do better. Tell me how I can get better." At first, the room was quiet, but staff members slowly started to talk. They talked about their experiences and gave advice. And Mr. Benjamin listened carefully, taking notes and asking good questions. People from different backgrounds did better in the kitchen. After Mr. Benjamin stopped being prejudiced, the chefs came from a variety of backgrounds and felt free to share their unique cooking ideas. As time went on, the menu changed, adding a lovely mix of flavors and techniques that showed off the staff's wide range of experiences. It was easy to feel the good changes in the workplace. A lot of laughter could be heard in the kitchen, and people started getting together outside of work hours. They set up potluck events where everyone brought a dish from their own culture. This helped people learn more about and appreciate each other's cultures. The evening sun was shining through the windows and giving Henry and Mr. Benjamin a warm glow. They were in the quiet office of L. Grand Prairie. There were no longer any sounds of activity coming from the kitchen as the last worker left for the day. Henry leaned back in his chair and looked at himself with deep thinking. As he spoke, his voice was soft and thoughtful. "You know, Mr. Benjamin, I never thought we'd be sitting here like this." Mr. Benjamin nodded, and there was a small smile on his normally serious face. "Neither did I. Henry, I've learned more in the last few months than in all of my previous jobs put together." Henry looked at the older man, noticing how his mood has changed. He no longer had the cold, rude attitude that had made him famous. Someone else stood in its place, and he seemed calmer with himself and with other people. Henry said, in a warm and encouraging voice, "I've seen such growth in you. That you've been open to change and started to really listen to the staff has been amazing to see." Henry looked into Mr. Benjamin's eyes, which were filled with a mix of thanks and remorse. "I should say sorry, Henry. I should not have treated you that way before. My own fears and stereotypes made me blind." Henry acknowledged the apology with a nod. "Mr. Benjamin, we all do bad things sometimes. The important thing is what we learn from them. I think people should be given second chances, and you've earned one." As they both thought about their trip, there was a calm silence between them. It was Mr. Benjamin who broke it first, and his voice was heavy with feeling. "Your kindness in giving me this job has taught me a lot about being a leader and being humble." Henry smiled, and the edges of his eyes wrinkled. "Isn't that what partnerships are all about? We grow together by learning from each other. We may have begun as enemies, but I believe we have now found something much more important." Mr. Benjamin agreed and nodded. "Yes, of course, Henry, I never thought I'd say this, but I'm glad to work with you. Your plans for this restaurant and your dedication to respect and openness are truly encouraging." They talked about new menu ideas, staff growth, and plans for the future of the restaurant. As the conversation went on smoothly, in every word and action, they showed that they respected each other. Things started to change for L. Grand Prairie as the weeks went by. The restaurant, which used to be known for its stuffy environment and traditional food, now had a new energy that customers couldn't help but notice. Henry and Mr. Benjamin were running it together. People in the city quickly heard about the changes at El Grand Prairie. People who had stayed away from the restaurant during Mr. Benjamin's rule started coming back because they had heard about new dishes and a friendly setting. They were pleased with what they discovered. The menu now had the right mix of traditional French food, with modern twists that were based on Henry's family history. Dishes like ratatouille fusion and coq au vin with African spices became instant hits, showing how well Henry and Mr. Benjamin worked together. People kept coming back for more than just the food, though. The staff used to be tense and scared, but now they worked with joy and a sense of purpose. Servers smiled at guests as they came in, and the kitchen was buzzing with good vibes. People could tell the change as soon as they walked in the door. People who had been going to L. Grand Prairie for years, like Mrs. Thompson, couldn't stop talking about how great the changes were. She told her friends over lunch one day, "It's like a breath of fresh air. Everyone is so happy to be here, and the food is better than ever." As word got out that the restaurant was getting better, food reviewers and the local news started to pay attention. The best newspaper in the city gave the restaurant a 5-star review, praising both the delicious food and the moving story of forgiveness and unity that led to its change. That night, L. Grand Prairie turned into more than just a place to eat. It became a sign of what could happen when people put aside their differences and worked together. Henry and Mr. Benjamin's partnership was seen as an example of good change by people in the community, and the restaurant started holding events that celebrated diversity and acceptance in the food world. Henry and Mr. Benjamin got a lot of satisfaction from seeing their dream come true. They often worked together in the kitchen, making meals that their guests loved while standing next to each other. Everyone who saw them work could tell that they respected each other, and it set the tone for the whole diner. Henry's story of how he went from being fired unfairly as a cook to becoming a successful restaurant owner started to reach people outside of the city. People from all walks of life could relate to his story of strength, forgiveness, and success in the face of hardship. As word got around, local news sites picked up on the moving story of how El Grand Prairie changed. Henry got a call from a famous morning show one sunny morning. They wanted to include him in a show about successful people in the area. When Henry first thought about being on TV, he was nervous, but Angela pushed him to tell his story. When the interview day came, Henry was sitting in front of bright studio lights while the cameras were rolling. He talked about his life from the heart. He talked about how discrimination hurt, how hard it was to find work, and how an unexpected chance changed everything. But most importantly, he talked about how important it is to accept and give people another chance. Henry said, with a teary voice, "I could have stayed angry, but I chose to forgive and move on. That choice opened doors I never thought possible." After the segment played, there was a huge response. Henry's phone started ringing non-stop with words of love and support. People from all over the country got in touch to say how his story had moved them. Soon, there were a lot of invites. A few national conferences even wanted Henry to be the main speaker at one of their events. Local business groups asked Henry to speak at their events, and culinary schools asked him to speak to their students. Henry at first felt like all the attention was too much for him. He was a chef who loved to cook, not a public speaker. He knew that his words could have an effect as he started to accept these offers. Henry was honest and humble as he talked about his experiences at each event. He talked about how important it is to keep going even when things get hard, how important it is to stay true to your heart, and how powerful forgiveness can be. His words hit people hard, and there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Many times, Henry took a moment to think about the amazing trip that had led him to this point. As he stood in the kitchen of his most famous restaurant, his staff busy getting ready for another busy night, the shiny surfaces and cutting-edge tools were very different from the small diner, where he used to work and struggle to make ends meet. When he looked out the window, he saw El Grand Prairie across the street. The restaurant, which had been having trouble before he and Mr. Benjamin took over, was now doing very well. It showed how important it is to forget and give people another chance. He felt a soft touch on the shoulder and turned around to see Angela smiling at him. Again lost in thought, "What do you mean?" she asked, her eyes shining with understanding. When she said yes, he pulled her into a warm hug. He said in a soft voice, "Just thinking about how far we've come. When I was fired from El Grand Prairie, never thought this would happen." Right on time, Mr. Benjamin walked into the kitchen in his clean cook whites. The two men gave each other a respectful nod. Their old disagreements were long forgotten. With a hint of joy in his voice, Mr. Benjamin said, "We've got a full house tonight." That time's food critic is back. Henry smiled and felt so thankful for the people who had come together to help him when things were at their worst. He remembered the charity cook-off that sparked his interest again, the food reviewer who had faith in him, and all the other people who had helped him reach his goal. Henry was getting ready to start the evening service when he noticed how many different kinds of people worked for him. This showed how hard he had worked to make the church a welcoming place for everyone. He understood that his restaurant was more than just a successful business. It was a symbol of hope that showed how kindness and honesty could win over prejudice and hardship. Henry felt so happy that he picked up his chef's knife and started to cook. He was thankful for the path that had led him to this point. Would you have forgiven Mr. Benjamin if you were in Henry's shoes? Yes or no? Let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear your perspective. And if you enjoyed the video, please subscribe to my channel. I am spending hours upon hours writing these heartwarming stories for you. And your support is what keeps me going.